and Sister Priscinda were, and also the main body of the church was there. Fulfilling Zina's expectations, in late September, Brigham sent his son-in-law, Charlie Decker, to bring Zina to winter quarters. Sometime between the death of her father in mid-August and her first weeks in winter quarters, it appears that Zina considered herself fully divorced from Henry and married to Brigham. This is evidenced by well-known facts, such as Zina moving into the tent row that Brigham provided for his wives at winter quarters. Sometime after arriving in winter quarters, Zina wrote a letter to her stepsister, Emily Dow Partridge, and stepmother, Lydia Partridge Huntington, who were still in Mount Pisgah. In the normal course of the letter, Zina expressed Brigham's love for Emily and signed the letter as your affectionate sister, Zina D. Huntington, instead of as Zina Jacobs. When Henry left Mount Pisgah, he headed eastward, back across the same trail the saints were still following from Nauvoo. There is no record of Zina ever writing directly to Henry on his mission, but Henry periodically wrote to her with his first letter written from Nauvoo. Henry then traveled to Chicago and on to Cambria, New York, where he met up with Oliver B. Huntington, his brother-in-law and missionary companion, on July the 11th. Oliver was living at the home of his in-laws with his wife of less than a year. Oliver and Henry left Cambria on August 6th and headed towards New York City, where they would meet other missionaries and arrange passage to England. In New York, Henry again wrote to Zina expressing his love and concern for her and the children. The letter also contains at least indirect evidence that Henry may have known of the shifting change in family alignment, that he knew Zina would go to live with Brigham Young. This is a portion of that letter. Zina, I have not forgotten you. My love is as ever the same, and much more abundantly, and hope that it will continue to grow stronger and stronger to all eternity, worlds without end, when families are joined together and become one, consolidated in truth, when the keys of the resurrection will be restored and the fullness of the gospel, given the law of the celestial kingdom, will be in force, and every man and woman will know their place and have to keep it. Though there will be shiftings in time and revisions in eternity, and all will be made right in the end. You told me in your letter that you calculated to start the next morning for the big camp. Well, may the Lord bless you and my little children with life and good health and a safe journey. Take good care of the cow and steers and all I left with you. Keep it safe till I return, for I will then give my best respects to Brother Brigham and family. Even as Henry professes his undying love for Zina, he indicates that though there will be shiftings in time and revisions in eternity, all will be made right in the end. It is significant that he indicates his understanding that Zina will start for the big camp, that's winter quarters, the next morning. He exhorts Zina to take care of the children, the cow, the steers, and that when he returns, he will again give my best respects to Brother Brigham and family. Henry and Oliver sailed from New York on August 22, 1846, arrived in Liverpool on October 1st, served a successful mission for approximately 9 months, sailed back to America on July 6, 1847, and finally arrived back in Cambria on August 18, 1847. Oliver's diary records that Henry left Cambria in the company of W. Phelps on September 14, 1847. Henry arrived in winter quarters near the middle of November. Mary Haskin Parker Richards records in her diary for November 16th that she took supper and spent the eve with Brother Henry B. Jacobs' folks. Henry spent the evening telling Mary about the saints in her native England and her family. Mary also referenced the evening's festivities in a letter to her husband, Samuel Richards, who was on a mission in England. She indicated that last Tuesday Eve I had a first-rate visit with Brother H.B. Jacobs and his wife. Henry's wife, the one that Mary refers to, is not Zina. Even though Zina was living in winter quarters at the time, the wife appears to be one that Henry married sometime between Oliver Huntington's letter of August 27th and Henry's arrival at winter quarters. Henry's new wife was Asenath Babcock, a 20-year-old widow and mother of a 5-year-old son. This presents an interesting situation and more evidence that both Henry and Zina now considered Zina to be Brigham's wife. Henry arrived in winter quarters with his new wife and stepson in November 1847. Zina didn't leave to go to the Salt Lake Valley until May 1848. Brigham was away during much of this 6-month period, and yet Henry and Zina did not live as husband and wife. In fact, there are no contemporary records that show that the two even talked to each other during this time. Zina migrated to the Salt Lake Valley in 1848 in the care of her brother, Oliver. He arrived in winter quarters on May 9, 1848, and they left within a week, along with over 1,000 other saints traveling in Brigham Young's company. Henry Jacobs left at the same time and also traveled in Brigham's company. Henry and Asenath traveled in a group under the command of William G. Perkins, a captain of 100. Henry was a captain of 10 within the group of 50, commanded by Eleazar Miller. Zina and Oliver arrived in the Salt Lake Valley on September 20th, 1848. We have no record of when or if Henry and Asenath arrived in the Salt Lake Valley. They show up in none of the extant records. It is possible that they split from the main group before the arrival into the Salt Lake Valley to take a southern route to California, or perhaps they moved right on through the valley to continue to California. One question that often comes up concerning the dissolution of Henry and Zina's marriage is why, if they were legally married, they never procured a legal divorce. Most people who raise this question have no problem with the concept of Joseph and Zina being married while Zina was still married to Henry. They typically assume that the marriage to Joseph was a platonic sealing with no earthly accoutrements that normally attend marriage. The point at which the question inevitably comes up is when Zina married Brigham in the Nauvoo Temple, continued to live with Henry during the trek across Iowa, and then transitioned into Brigham's family after Henry left for his mission to England. There are 2 points at which a divorce could reasonably have taken place: in Nauvoo, at about the time that Zina and Brigham were married, or in Iowa, after Henry left for England. There is no record of any divorce in Hancock County, Illinois. This is not surprising. For the 19 months from the martyrdom in June 1844 until the saints were driven from Nauvoo in February 1846, the relationship between the saints and the various levels of government was tenuous at best. The saints did not trust the state or federal governments, having felt betrayed at every turn over the years. There is evidence that the Nauvoo municipal government was very dysfunctional during this period, and then entirely non-existent after the revocation of the Nauvoo Charter in January 1845. A year later, when Zina and Brigham were sealed, it is doubtful that the saints would have turned to those they viewed as hostile enemies to request a divorce. The situation is even more unclear as the saints migrated westward through frontier Iowa. According to Iowa territorial law in 1846, divorces were granted by district courts. At the time, there were only 3 district courts established in the Iowa Territory, and these covered only the easternmost counties of the state. There were no district courts that covered the unincorporated areas, the Indian lands where Mount Pisgah was located, nor were there any in 1846 in any of the counties bordering the unincorporated areas. Critics who complain of Henry and Zina's not having a legal and lawful divorce fail to point out what constitutes legal and lawful when it comes to a frontier where there is no established government. Who exactly should Henry and Zina have gone to in order to satisfy our modern sensibilities of what constitutes a legal and lawful dissolution of marriage? The inaccessibility of government and the hostility of the trail may not be the only reasons why a formal divorce was not sought by Henry and Zina. Many people during that era, Mormon and non-Mormon alike, particularly those who were poor and transient, conditions that certainly apply to this couple, would engage in self-divorce. Rather than seek out the approbation of authority that was often seen as meddlesome, distant, and aloof, couples would simply agree to dissolve their marriage and then each go their separate ways. This seemed, to those predisposed to distrust a hostile government, a practical and pragmatic solution to ending a marriage, and appears to be the path chosen by Henry and Zina. One of the recurring explanations for the dissolution of Henry and Zina's marriage is that it was an unhappy union. This explanation seems to have first surfaced in the written record in the late 1870s or early 1880s. In 1883, a picture entitled "Representative Women, a Deseret" was published, which showed many of the leading women of the Relief Society. Among these was Zina D.H. Young. In the following year, Augusta Joyce Crocheron wrote a short book as an adjunct to the picture, containing short biographical sketches for each of the women. In the information about Zina, the statement is made that Sister Zina was married in Nauvoo, had 2 sons, but this not proving a happy union, she subsequently separated from her husband. This verbiage, according to the author, relied heavily on earlier statements in the Women's Exponent. This verbiage also was repeated in later years by other authors and by Zina herself in her 1898 interview with John W. Wyatt. The theme was picked up and repeated in later 20th century publications and studies as well. Was Zina's marriage to Henry really unhappy? It may be more fruitful to ask